this computer. It's recording. I'll record a separate kind of like intro, but I'll start from now.
Okay.
And today we're interviewing Alicia Butler Pierre from Equilibria. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
So tell us a little bit about you and your company.
Well, my company is Equilibria Incorporated. I have been in business now close to 15 years, hard to believe. And what we do at Equilibria is we specialize in working with fast-growing companies. We basically help them scale with less pain.
Got it. There's a lot of need for that in the marketplace, that's for sure.
Yes.
Can you take us through some of the types of clients and a bit of your process?
Sure. Some of my typical client has been in business for at least 5 to 7 years, and they're at a point where they have invested very heavily and rightfully so in marketing and PR and promotions and branding. And now they're at a point, Mike, where they're starting to reap the benefits of all of that money that they put into their marketing efforts. Now they are actually at a point where they may have more business than they can handle. And that's when they realize they need to start taking a look at their actual day-to-day operations and figure out how they can streamline what they're doing so that they can actually meet the demand that they currently have.
Got it. And so tell me a little bit about how the service ranges. Is it, helping people with hiring decisions, building processes internally? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, you hit the nail on the head. It almost always starts with answering the question, what work needs to be done? Because you're right, as you're growing rapidly, you obviously have to expand your team. And so the first thing that I help them figure out is what work actually needs to be done and who should ideally do that work. So in a perfect world, if you had access to all of the resources that you needed, who would those people be? What would their roles be? And then let's actually look at the processes. So once you start to actually hire people, they need to know how to do the work. So answering what to do as well as how to do that work is equally as important.
Got it. And how does a typical engagement with your company work? Is it in-house? Is it done online? Tell me a little bit about that.
Great question. So there are different ways that we can work together. So I have a book. A lot of times when people first contact me, there's an initial consultation, and I'm usually able to direct them to my book and point out a very specific chapter or two that they should read. We then follow up with another conversation, and then they decide whether or not they want to have ongoing coaching. So that's more of a do-it-yourself model where we can set up some hourly sessions or 2-hour sessions, and I just guide them through the methodology that I've created. Another way is to actually work on a project type basis where there are some people who say, you know what, yes, I've read it, I understand what I've read, but I still need someone to come in here and actually facilitate to make sure that this gets done correctly. And then something that I'm going to be exploring in the very near future, Mike, is classes, not online classes, but basically in-person workshops.
Got it. And that will kind of bring together and help you kind of scale. I like the idea of workshops because it gives multiple people the ability to kind of see what everyone else is experiencing.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there's still value in that. And it's funny, I've asked so many of my clients just this year alone, if I were to create a virtual class around this, would it be nearly as effective as if we had an in-person workshop? And almost every time they said a workshop.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. All right. Well, that's very interesting. So let's switch gears and talk about LinkedIn. I mean, it's obviously something that you reference and speak to your clients about.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your experience with it.
I love LinkedIn. I have been on LinkedIn since they started, actually. So I have seen the progression of LinkedIn over the years. And I can remember when I first got on LinkedIn, there were mainly entrepreneurs and salespeople on LinkedIn. And once they were purchased by Microsoft, it started to become more about finding jobs and connecting recruiters with candidates. But there is still a lot of value for those of us entrepreneurs who are looking to connect with either other entrepreneurs or even potential clients as well. So it's just such an invaluable tool that I still think most users are only scratching the surface when it comes to LinkedIn.
Sure. And what would you say is the biggest change that you've seen? I mean, from the time that it started, it's been around, I don't know how long it's been around, maybe 10, 15
Since
years?
2005, I believe.
2005? But yeah, so close to
I think
15 years.
so.
What's the biggest shift that you've seen since your inception of it?
One major shift is, and I can't think of another way of expressing it, but the noisiness of it.
Mhm.
So there weren't nearly as many posts. That wasn't a thing. It was all about groups. It was truly about linking to other people, the connections. So I was a part of so many different groups, Mike, and it was great because whenever I had a situation that I was facing in my business, I would actually go to my LinkedIn groups and pose a question before I would actually seek counsel from an actual consultant or advisor. And I would just be amazed at how much free advice that was accurate advice that I would actually receive through LinkedIn groups.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I've seen, you do see them push it every once in a while where oh, you should join these, or here are some suggested groups. So they do certainly try and push them on you, but I don't think a lot of people utilize them to their full potential.
Yes.
And would
Because when you think about it, there's so many different things now that you can do with LinkedIn. You can post individual posts, you can have groups, you can have a company page, you can actually post articles now. When I was first on LinkedIn, that wasn't a thing where you could actually post an article to LinkedIn. So I think because there's so many more options now, it's just a matter of figuring out, okay, where is your sweet spot when it comes to leveraging LinkedIn?
Got it. And do you have any, suggestions or advice for people on how to best leverage kind of that group relationship?
I would say find groups that represent the types of clients that you would typically work with or customers. Also find groups that represent your interest. For example, I'm in Toastmasters. I've joined some Toastmasters groups on LinkedIn. Another group that I'm a part of is the Harvard Business Review, because it's a magazine that I've subscribed to and I enjoy the articles. And so I thought, well, why not join that group as well? But I'll have to admit, even I have slacked off with my use of groups, just because these groups can become so large that in some ways it can almost lose its effectiveness. So what I've been finding is that some of the more private groups are more effective.
Hmm. Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. Yeah, I mean, you see some now that are in the hundreds of thousands of members with,
Exactly.
20, 30 different posts every day. And it's like, well,
Yes,
I don't have time to pay attention to that.
exactly.
What would you recommend, like when you're talking to a client or somebody that's working on a business or a brand of their own, would you think that there's probably benefit to them trying to start a group?
I think there's tremendous benefit in starting a group, but here's the thing to remember. The thing, when it comes to groups, everyone is talking about Facebook groups.
Mm.
But I still think that you can really leverage LinkedIn groups to your advantage. I think if you keep the group private so that it's a little bit more manageable, and set some guidelines and parameters, because you will inevitably have people who will join a group, especially if you make it open to the public. They're just all about boosting themselves. They don't really care about addressing some of the needs and concerns that other members of the group may be posing.
Mm.
So I think if you keep your group private, and there's a certain air of inclusivity, I guess, when you say that your group is private. Who doesn't want to be part of a members only type organization? But with that, just make sure that you really are doing your job and providing value to the members of that group. So it's going to require a lot more work because you have to curate and really monitor the content that people are posting. But I certainly think it's a tremendous asset to add to your suite of services that you may be offering to your clients.
Absolutely. All right, perfect. So I know you talk a lot, and I mean, I think you're fundamentally built on processes. So
Yes.
let's unpack that a little bit. Tell me a little bit about how a process works.
So what I find, because I've been doing this for so long, people use the word process and procedure. A lot of times these terms are just thrown out there, but I don't think that people really understand in general what we mean when we say a process. So when I say process, I mean a sequential set of steps that you take in order to produce a desired result. So think of it, Mike, as a recipe. Think about your favorite meal at your favorite restaurant. If the chef were to give you the ingredients in preparing that actual meal, would you be able to go home and replicate it?
Probably not. No.
Exactly, because you need the steps. And so if you think about a recipe is really a process. It's telling you all of the ingredients that you need, and it's telling you the order in which you need to prepare those ingredients and the different tools and equipment that are needed in order to prepare that dish. The same is true with the process. If you want someone to be able to replicate what you do so well, you have to document it.
Got it. Absolutely. And I think, I think a lot of people can benefit from creating those things. I think a lot of people, when they think about communicating on LinkedIn, posting content, making content, planning content, all of these things, we've found too, where if we don't have a really specific step by step or some kind of a process in place, it becomes it doesn't feel like as much of a necessary practice. It kind of feels like a nice to have. And we've tried to
Yeah.
really shift into that direction. So what kind of tips or what kind of advice can you share for people that know they should be more active? They know they need to be able to create some systems for themselves to get better on these platforms. How would you help them get through that?
So if I can, I'd like to walk us through 5 main steps, and I have a bonus to add to that at the end. So
Awesome.
it all starts with determining your why. If for those who are listening, there's a famous TED talk by Simon Sinek, what is your why? Start with why you are actually using LinkedIn. I think so many of us, we get on there and we have a kind of a willy-nilly type approach. But if you can be very specific and very intentional about why you are using LinkedIn, it can certainly reap benefits for you. Just as a quick aside, when I first started using LinkedIn, my title was efficiency engineer. Now that's great in terms of branding because it's unique and, oh, I've never heard of an efficiency engineer before, Alicia. Tell me more about that. But here's the thing, that does not translate well online.
Hmm.
You have to leverage keywords that people are actually using to search. And Mike, for a long time when I was on LinkedIn in the beginning, nobody was searching my profile because I was not using language that people were likely to use as they searched. So just that little nugget alone made a huge difference for me. When I switched from saying, oh, I'm an efficiency engineer to saying, I'm a process improvement consultant. I specialize in operational excellence. And the way I got to those keywords, I started going to different job board websites. And I started looking at jobs that reflected the type of work that I was doing. And I really studied the language that they were using. And I just started to embed those keywords throughout my LinkedIn profile.
Got it. Yeah.
The second part to that, so determine your why. What do you want your name to be synonymous with? So when I think of Mike Mall, Mike, what do you want me to think of when I think of you?
Yeah, so the way that I position it is kind of the concept of brand builder. What we focus on is how do I make meaningful content that my consumers would want to consume, and how do I provide a ton of value so that it's not even a sales process anymore. It's just, I want to work with those guys who gave me all the awesome advice.
Right. And so now that I've heard you say that, and for those who are listening, once you figure out what you want your name to be synonymous with, everything that you post needs to speak to a story, branding, marketing, and don't deviate from that. Because something else that I've noticed people will do is they'll talk about, oh yes, I'm posting something about real estate, or I'm posting something about podcasting, I'm posting something about my book. And that's okay, but always tie it back to what you want to be known for.
Got it.
You can talk about all kinds of different topics, but always bring it back to what you want your name to be synonymous with.
Makes sense. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah. And actually, I have a book that I would like to recommend. I don't know if you can see this.
Yep.
It's called Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. This is an excellent book. So if you are having some difficulty figuring out your why, or what you want your brand to be, what you want your name to be synonymous with, I highly recommend reading this book.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. What's number 3?
So actually there were 2 parts to number 1.
Got it. Got it.
So number 2 is actually once you figured out your why, you know who your audience is, start gathering source information. I hear this from people all the time. I don't know what to post about. I don't know what to write about. Start thinking. There are different ways that you can post. You can actually comment on articles that you've read and place a link to that article. You can curate other content, meaning if you subscribe to something like Google Alerts and you put in filters that say, I want to receive a feed about anytime someone posts an article about personal branding anywhere online, and that way you will receive an email. You can start to read those different articles, and you can just maybe place links to those articles in your feed on LinkedIn.
Love that.
You can also create your own content. And this is where I think so many people get hung up, because they think they don't have it in them to create the content. And I tell them, surely at some point in your career, you've had to develop a presentation. You've written some type of an article. You may have written a blog post. You may have newsletters that you've contributed to. You have content. Start digging up all of that old content. Take out those reports that you may have written, case studies, white papers. The list goes on and on. Videos that you may have done. Take that information, and I guarantee you, within one blog post, for example, Mike, you may have 5 to 6 different pieces of individual content that you can actually post on LinkedIn.
Yep.
And I would like to, I wanted to be able to offer some tools and books, that people can reference. So the tool again is called Google Alerts. Mm-hmm. And when you go there, this is a free service. You just type in what you would like to receive an alert about. And it could be any topic that you can think of. And on my podcast, which is the Business Infrastructure Podcast, there's a particular episode number 51, which is entitled Designing a Digital Content Management Process. If people go there, it's a fairly lengthy podcast. It's a monologue where I literally detailed out how I actually gather up that source information to start posting online.
Amazing. I'll link that out. In the bottom of the video
thank you.
well.
Thank you. And so now with step number 3 is you want to actually create your copy. I tell people this is something else I often tell people about. If you can't say something to someone in their face to face, don't write it. Whatever you put online, even if you delete it, you never know who else is watching something before you actually delete a post. They may have already captured a screenshot. So just be really careful about what you post, the tone and the manner in which you post it. If sometimes they say with email etiquette, If you're angry, you may have typed something out in anger. Before you press that send button, step away for a few minutes, come back and read it, and then you can decide whether or not you need to edit it. The same is true with posting your actual copy. Be intentional with what you write. A lot of times I see people, they may type 2 lines, and then they'll just tag a whole bunch of people just to draw eyeballs to their posts. And I think LinkedIn's algorithm is smart enough to know, hey, wait a minute, this person only, the over 50% of the actual content of this post is tagging other people. What substance have they actually provided? What value have they provided in the content that they've actually posted? You have to provide value. Otherwise, you're just contributing to the noise. Yes. And I think that's something that so many people don't get right on LinkedIn. And so, yes, you do have to be thoughtful. And being thoughtful means it might take you 15 to 20 minutes just to really think of how you want to word something. But I promise you, it's well worth the effort. Something else in terms of tools that I would like to recommend, there's Grammarly. Have you ever used Grammarly, Mike?
I absolutely require Grammarly to function.
So if you are concerned that you don't have maybe the best grammatical or punctuation skills in your writing, consider downloading Grammarly. It's a free tool. They have paid for parts of their service, but just on a very basic level, it can tell you, hey, Mike, you need to put a comma here, or are you sure you want to word this way? Maybe this is written in the passive voice instead of active. It can point things out like that for you. And again, they have a free version of that. Another thing that I'd like to recommend, Mike, is another book by Robert Cialdini, and it's called Persuasion, not persuasion. So it's the things that you say and do that lead up to whatever it is you want people to do. So if you're trying to sell a webinar, if you're trying to sell a book, if you're trying to promote a service, whatever it is, there are certain activities, certain things that you say and do that he's referring to as persuasion that lead up to that. And your copy, your actual copy that you're posting on LinkedIn can definitely leverage some of these techniques that he talks about in this book.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
That's something else to share with you all. And okay, now for the exciting part, you actually want to post. So step 4 or tip 4 is actually posting. I always like to think of a post, the anatomy of the post. So you have the copy itself, which we just talked about. There are the tags, your ability to tag other people and companies. There's also hashtags. And then there's links and then images or video that you may add to support your copy. When it comes to tagging, and this is some advice that I received from Greg Burkhalter. I think I may have introduced you to Greg.
Yeah, we had a chat. Yeah.
Yes, for those who are listening, please consider following Greg. He's the LinkedIn guy. One of the feedback that he gave me earlier this year, he said, stop tagging, placing all of these hashtags throughout the body of your copy, because it's just getting lost in the sauce. So he started suggesting that I put my hashtags at the very end of my copy. And that has worked out really well. Another trick that he recently told me about is limit your hashtags to 3, at the most 4. Because again, it just gets lost after that 3rd or 4th hashtag. And I would add to that, when you're using hashtags, make sure you use hashtags that people actually search on. This is another mistake that I was making, Mike. I talk about business infrastructure. That's what I build for my clients. At the end of the day, it's business infrastructure. Sounds great, but guess what? Nobody searches for that.
No, I can imagine.
Nobody is searching for it. And the way we figured that out, I think when you first log into your LinkedIn profile, I believe on the home page, if you look on the left-hand side of the screen, it kind of tells you the hashtags that you follow, or maybe hashtags that you've used. I'm trying to go off of memory here. But I'll never forget one day I actually clicked on business infrastructure and there was zero activity. And boy, was that eye-opening.
Yep, I bet.
And so what I started doing, I started using operational excellence instead, process improvement. And what started happening, Mike, is some of my posts actually started to trend within those particular hashtags. I was the same messaging, same flavor of copy, but just me changing the hashtag made all the difference in the world. More people were actually able to see those posts just because of the hashtags. Another thing, when you're using links, let's say you want to comment on a really good article that you saw in Inc. magazine, and you may place that link within the body of your post. Always check to make sure that the image that appears is actually representative of what the article is about. This has happened to me a couple of times too. I'm so quick to type something out, I'll place a link, and then I'll press the post button. And then when I actually see it live in the feed, I'm going, oh no, either an image didn't appear at all, or the image is distorted in some type of way. So sometimes it may require you having to create your own image. Here's the thing, if you're going to have an image, make sure it's actually supporting and enhancing your copy as opposed to taking away from it or distracting from it. So one tool that I highly recommend is canva.com, CANVA.com. It's, again, another free tool for graphics. And they actually already have templates built out for LinkedIn posts. You just select the fact that you want to create an image for a LinkedIn post. You upload whatever artwork you may have, or they also have some templates that you can leverage. That's a great way to get some really clean, fresh, visually appealing graphics to support your copy.
Absolutely. One thing that we noticed, so we create content for YouTube, and we were trying to share the episodes of our thing onto LinkedIn, but if you use the YouTube links, it completely distorts the image. It doesn't come up properly at all, which is strange because it's two big companies you'd think that it would look good, but the preview of the YouTube video comes out just horribly looking. So yeah, we've had to create a lot of our own content for that as well. So it's a very good point.
Yes. And, so another book, I have all these books. So this is a great book. It's called How to Get Your Point Across in 30 Seconds or Less. So you want to have a post that's visually appealing. Always keep in mind that the first 3 lines of your copy is what's going to appear as people are scrolling through their feed. Make it so powerful and so dynamic and so eye-catching that people have no choice but to, as they're scrolling, they're going to say, oh, wait a minute. Who's this Mike Mall guy? Wow, that's a really cool picture there. Okay, let me click on this and let me check out his YouTube video. But I love this book because it does a great job. We only have, is it 1,200 characters that LinkedIn allows for a post?
I'm actually not even sure.
I think it's around that 1,200 number. So this is a great book. I use this a lot whenever I'm preparing for a speech. It does a great job because I have a tendency to get wordy and drag on, and this book helps me tremendously in getting to the meat of what I'm trying to communicate in a very short, just a few short paragraphs.
Got it. That's great.
So that's another resource there. And we're at our last step here in the process, and that is the engagement piece. So you know your why, you've created your copy, you've posted it. Now people are starting to comment. They're liking, they're loving, they're giving you a congratulatory hand clap. When people engage, make sure you respond. There have been so many times, Mike, when I have commented on someone's post. Oh, congratulations, Mike. That's so great that you won the blah, blah, blah award. I can't wait to see what's coming up next. And you hear nothing from them. And a lot of times I used to interpret that as, well, Mike is, you know, what's up with that? You know, Mike isn't even, you know, he's not even accepting my congratulatory remark. But it could be that you just don't even realize, because you're not checking LinkedIn often, you don't realize that people are actually commenting on your posts. So that's why I mean, you almost have to check it daily. You really do. And when you check your profile, you will notice in the very top menu, it says notifications. That if you click on that notifications icon, it will actually give you a feed of every single time someone has engaged with your content in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And by engagement, again, we mean they've commented on it, they've liked it, they may have reshared your post with someone else, they may have posted your original post into a group. You will be able to see all of the different ways that people have interacted with your content. Be sure you thank them.
Got it.
Thank them for that, so that you develop a rapport with people. I've built so many relationships just from posting, I'm sorry, just from commenting and having dialogue with other people within the thread of someone else's post. Yeah. So you just never know. One great book that I would recommend in terms of engagement, this is old school, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And I'm sure you know this book, Mike, but it is such an excellent primer, in my opinion, just on the principles of networking. LinkedIn is a networking tool. So many people say, oh, it doesn't work. I never use it. I never get any business. It all starts with having the relationship. LinkedIn can help you make the connection. That's it. It's up to you to actually develop a relationship with your connections.
That's a great point.
Yes. And just to quote one of the guests that I had on my podcast, her name is Heather Havenwood. She said something that I thought was so brilliant. She said, if content is king, then engagement is queen. I thought that was so brilliant. And I like that. Just as a bonus, so we've talked through the 5 steps. Now you want to actually formalize your process. So as you start posting, you're commenting, you're going to start noticing what's trending, what types of things am I posting that people seem to really like and comment on. Start doing more of that. Look at those metrics. Develop a checklist. It doesn't have to be a step 1, you do this, and step 2, you do that. So many people think that in terms of a process. It could be as simple as having a checklist. Okay, every weekday, this is what we need to do. We need to log into LinkedIn. We need to see we need to look at our notifications. We need to look and see whether or not anyone has sent us a personal message and make sure we respond to it. We also need to make sure that we post time of day. That's something that I forgot to mention. There's definitely a method to my madness. There are certain things that I post, Mike. So for example, I spoke at an event here in Atlanta, Georgia, earlier this week. I knew to make sure that I posted that between the hours of 5:30 to 7:30 in the morning, because that's when my people are awake and they're looking at their LinkedIn before they get their day started.
Got it.
If I were to post that, let's say at 10 o'clock in the morning, it would not have nearly as many eyeballs on it, because by that point, people who are here locally, they're already in the thick of their day. Similarly, if I really want to get a lot of attention or exposure on something, let's say if there's a video, I will intentionally post it somewhere between noon and 3 p.m. Eastern time, because that way I make sure that all of my connections on the West Coast are also likely to see it at a time when they would be awake, and also people that I may know in Australia, Hong Kong. So just be mindful also of the time of day that you post as well. And just as a last little shameless plug here, so this is my book. It's called Behind the Facade: How to Structure Company Operations for Sustainable Success. Chapter 8 talks is all about process. So if you're here, if you're listening to this and you say, okay, well, I understand a little bit more about LinkedIn, but I want to know a little bit more about how I actually create a process for LinkedIn. Chapter 8 of this book will definitely give you all of the details that you need to make that happen.
Amazing. That was great. Well, that was a lot. That was a lot of super helpful information. I know people are going to get a ton of value from this talk. So I'll link up, all the books, all the tools, and all the resources that you mentioned. Some of them actually we're already using. So
Oh,
I
awesome.
100% agree. I mean, Google Alerts is an absolute godsend in my opinion. It's the
Yes.
greatest little piece of the internet, especially when we need to produce content for different clients. So, there's keywords and their brand, and we want to know who's talking about what, and it gives us a really great eyes into that.
Yes. And so many of them are free,
Yeah, it's crazy.
which is even better.
Well, listen, Alicia, thank you so much for your time. This is excellent. And how can people get in touch with you?
A great way to get in touch with me is through LinkedIn. Let's
Perfect.
connect on LinkedIn. Look for me at Alicia Butler Pierre. And my website is eqbsystems.com. But again, let's start with LinkedIn, because from there you can see links to everything else.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike.